Welcome back to Spreadsheets and Sliders, where the GMs are sharp, the Sims are cruel, and we're all just looking for spreadsheet glory in a virtual world.
We're your hosts. I'm Aaron Mariners, and with me is Jacob Red Sox.
Episode 2 is here, where we'll be discussing the first half of the 2030 season and the state of the league following the trade deadline. Who are the contenders and who are the pretenders? We'll share our thoughts on how the postseason picture might shape up as we head down the stretch.
It's been a busy week in Top Shelf, with 17 of 30 teams making trades around the deadline. Overall, we ended up with 9 buyers, 6 sellers, and a couple of teams who made out neutral, for a combined 25 trades over the last few days, including 12 on deadline day. One of the most notable points going into this second half is that 3 teams in the NL East ended up buying at the deadline.
Yeah, I think the NL East is one of the more interesting divisions in baseball, in Top Shelf at least. If you want to start from the top, we can look at Miami. They were pretty aggressive at the deadline, I would say.
Yeah, they had a couple huge acquisitions in Christian Campbell, Felix Bautista, and Carlos Rodon. Bautista and Rodon, they didn't have to give up too much for. They did send Connolly early over to Arizona, but the Christian Campbell deal is really notable.
Yeah, Christian Campbell was one where I really like the player. Obviously, he was in my organization for a little while, won a gold glove with me in 2026. But moving to Miami, I thought initially was a little puzzling because they already have an all star first baseman in Devison De Los Santos. But with the defensive acumen that Campbell has, I think it's nice now that Miami is able to push De Los Santos into the DH role and have Campbell roam at first base.
Campbell's nice because he brings a little bit of power, a little bit of speed. He's a good all around candidate for great contender in Miami. Miami last year made a good run. This year, they weren't super active until right when the deadline hit, and then they started making moves, but they're definitely the favorite coming out of the East. What about these other two teams?
Yeah, so for the other two teams, we're seeing that the Mets and the Braves are both looking to push as well. I want to go for the Braves first because we're looking here. They do still have the very fearsome offensive core of Acuna, Henderson, Abreu, and Michael Harris II, but they added another bat actually in Willie Abreu, who's having a nice bounce back season after a first rough one in Detroit.
I was really surprised looking at Abreu's numbers earlier in the season because I was totally used to, what he was doing last year. He turned out to put up almost an 800 OPS in Detroit before coming over to Atlanta, and right off the bat, he is putting up the exact same numbers with Atlanta. He was fortunately able to come to a much better chance at winning this year because Detroit meant to go all in and they've fallen a little bit flat. But, in return, Atlanta gives up Spencer Strider.
I think it's a bit of a unfortunate end for Spencer Strider's time in Atlanta. He just couldn't quite stay healthy for them over the last couple of years. He had a really nice 2028, but he missed all of 2029. Still actually out with a UCL tear that he suffered this year. So really, Strider is just having just a tough go of it, and it's tough to see a guy that in real life has such nice talent. He still has the pitches there, but he's already regressed all the way down, at least by the Red Sox scouts, to a 49-49. And Detroit's going to hope that he can recapture some of that form going forward, but for now, Abreu is definitely the better win now player for Atlanta.
Right. One of the things that I know we've been mentioning, especially in my division, is how these teams that have been competing every year end up dumping their farm in order to do so. Notably, like Seattle and Texas over the last couple of years have really sent out every, developing piece in order to get these win now bats and a couple of arms. Does Atlanta have anyone in their farm that's ready to, contribute to this fearsome core that you're talking about?
I mean, in terms of the players that they have in the farm, they do have first baseman Marco Linares ready to, come up and take the mantle relatively soon. He's only 20 years old, but he's developing pretty nicely and putting up good numbers in Double A, maybe a year or two away, depending on how accelerated his development is. I want to highlight someone who's actually in the majors, though. I want to highlight starting pitcher Luis Aristeguieta. He's developing in the majors right now. This is his rookie year, but he's been one of the better pitchers in baseball. He's put up already 24 starts at a 3.52 ERA as of the time of this recording. He's 56-65 by the Red Sox scouts, but he's really stepped into that role that Strider has unfortunately been unable to fill in the last couple of years.
Yeah, it's fortunate that Atlanta's been able to develop a starting pitcher of his caliber just because I think as we've seen this year and last year at the deadline, these power arms are really hard to acquire without having significant capital to give up. Fortunately, Atlanta has Aristigueta ready to go. He's developing on the fly, has a high ceiling. Atlanta's going to be able to compete for a few years down the line now. What do you think about the Mets acquiring Bryce Miller at the deadline?
The Mets getting Bryce Miller should really, really help them because they were looking for mostly budget ads. The Mets have had a bit of a restricted budget room. So while they are playing fairly well to this point in the season, at least in the context of their division, having another steady arm like Bryce Miller, who was having quietly a pretty good season in Seattle, even though the rest of that team was not doing so well, should help them shore up and be more consistent in the rotation. And that's what they're going to need because they do have a fairly balanced roster overall that seems to be underperforming a little bit, and they'll really need to push that up a gear.
Yeah, I was pretty surprised when they signed Jake McCarthy to that huge contract last offseason, but he's turned out to be a fantastic leadoff man for them. He has them in prime position. He's on track for a career year in WAR. He's been right there at the leadoff position for them, and he's helped them get eighth ranked stolen bases in the league, which is not amazing, but it's better than, where they were last year down at the bottom of the rankings.
Yeah, the fact that the New York Mets are even above 500 right now is big considering how tough it's been for them in the last few years. So they're definitely on an upswing, and it's nice to see another team besides the Braves and the Marlins really making some noise in the East.
Yeah, we still have a couple of teams here. Philly and Washington are not exactly in the picture as much this year. Philly, we've seen, make a couple moves over the last year or two that we're not sure which direction they're exactly going, but they could be contending next year if they free some money up.
Yeah, Philadelphia's in a bit of a weird spot because you look at that roster and you look at the names and the ratings by scouts. There's a lot of talent on there. You have guys like Fernando Tatis Jr., who was picked up last year. Michael Bush was also picked up in the offseason in a trade from Boston. He's hitting quite well still for them. They have 27 home runs from Tyler Soderstrom at the first base position. And overall, you see guys like Andrew Painter having good years, Brian Bales. This is a team that doesn't look like it should be as bad as it is, but unfortunately, they're sitting there like far in the basement of the NL East.
Yeah, from what I'm seeing, their defense is struggling a lot. Their team wide zone rating is negative 25.1. So they're 13th in the NL. Defensive efficiency, they're 11th in the NL. That's not going to play very well with young pitchers because young pitchers often struggle with control. They often struggle with consistency. You need some decent defense to back that up. So it's no surprise to me why, even if their bullpen ERA is 8th, the Phillies are 14th in FIP. They just haven't been able to convert the strong efforts by Painter and Bales into actual wins, even though they have some good offensive contributions across the board. Now, with Washington, they have a bona fide ace in Noah Schultz, but where do you think they'll be next year?
So Washington is an extremely strange team for me when you really kind of dig into the nitty gritty of them. They do have a new GM this year, so it'll be interesting to see what their strategy is because they've been kind of stuck in neutral for the last couple. But I want to point out that they have an offense that on paper for me doesn't really make any sense. If you look at their team rankings, they're last in almost every single offensive category as a team. 15th in run score, 15th in average, 15th in on base percentage, so on and so forth. But you look at the lineup and you have, former MVP James Wood playing very well. You have center fielder Dante Nori, who was traded from the Los Angeles Angels earlier, playing very well. Logan O'Hoppe playing very well. Carson Williams, again acquired in a trade, playing very well. All of these, like their individual numbers look fine to me, but they're just unable to translate that into winning games and into a winning offense.
Yeah, the seem to be doing what Anaheim did a couple years ago, building into this league where they were really focused on strong defense and young pitching. Anaheim, nowadays is a complete roster, huge contender. They've built off of that core. And the Nationals, off of the backs of, Edwin Arroyo, they have Carson Williams, like you said. These are great defensive players. Luis Garcia's put up good numbers since he's come over on the defensive side of the ball. And that's still going to be a good recipe for success. The Nats this year are only 8 games under 500, so it's not like they're a tanking team that looks terrible. They still have some bright spots. Before the new GM got here, I know that they were trying to sell off a couple of these younger guys like Carson Williams and Logan O'Hoppe, but the fact that both of those stuck around means that maybe the Nationals go into next year just trying to reload and build off of that core instead of selling off their roster.
That's a direction that I'd like to see from the Nationals. They have some really, really promising young talent that I think is going to be hard to replace. So trying to build around those guys, especially with, promising individual metrics would be a really nice way to shake up the power balance in the NL East for me.
Yeah, NL East, with those three buyers is going to be competitive coming down to the wire here. All three teams competing for a share to the title or a wild card spot. Moving over to the AL West, though, Vegas is also in that same boat with Washington, where they're kind of on the cusp. They've built up a little bit of a young core. We know that they have some prospects coming in, but the AL West is in a weird spot right now because since Seattle sold at the deadline, Texas and Anaheim are gaining a lot of separation, so that division is just becoming, really heavy top and really low bottom unless Vegas and Seattle can sort of turn it around soon.
Touching on the point of Vegas, I would say that unfortunately for me, they were my dark horse in the preseason to be top of the table. And unfortunately, even though they had a nice and competitive first maybe month, 6 weeks of the season, they started to falter and slow down as they went on. Eventually, that did translate into them eventually sending out starting pitcher Diego Barrera, who was having a very nice season for them. He is going to a very good team in the Padres, which we'll touch on later. But that signal to me already that this team is definitely not looking to this year and not looking to recover for this year. But they definitely still have some young pieces that are looking nice and performing well, even if the overall team isn't.
I think their pitching is going to be a strong suit going forward. They have a really good two-headed monster this year with the two prospects, Marco Solis and Wei Lin. Both of them have been starters in the organization, and they're both only 24 years old, moving quickly through the ranks. Both of them are going to end up with around 200 innings this year, which is fantastic for young pitchers. I mean, Vegas might want to play at this point for a better draft pick, but they're still somewhat competitive, and they were able to bolster their pitching depth by trading away Barrera, who they probably couldn't have re-signed for cheap, and getting back Leonardo Rondon from the Padres.
Yeah, Leonardo Rondon is a player who I had on my watch list for a while as a prospect, and I am a really big fan. He's really close to being major league ready, has developed in pretty much all of his major categories. And I do think that when Vegas decides that they're finally going to pull the trigger and go all in on that competitive window, that he should be a big part of that.
Yeah, I agree. Anaheim also made a couple of moves toward the deadline here. They've been hanging with Texas all season, and it was a little bit surprising to me that they let Jordan go, but they picked up Troy Taylor from the Mariners to help solidify that already very strong bullpen.
Yeah, the Jordan deal, as someone who was involved with it, was a little bit strange that he came onto the market, in my opinion. But from what Anaheim has said, I do understand what they are trying to do. They were thinking that Jordan is not likely to be someone that's going to be sticking around, and as a team that's building to stay a contender, they were hoping to get just a little bit back so that they can try giving some of their younger talent reps at the DH, especially since they pretty much at this point in the season are heavy favorites to take a wild card spot, if not the first wild card spot. So experimenting a little bit with your DH shouldn't be too damaging to them. But as you said, they've been hanging with Texas all season. They're a top five team in runs. They're a top three teams in runs against. And having Troy Taylor now not even acquired to be the closer, he's actually currently in a setup position because they have one of the best closers in the league in Andres Munoz.
And Munoz is expensive, so I know that the GM was trying to shop him at the deadline just to maybe reload on a different position. I'm not entirely sure, but bringing in Troy Taylor and keeping Andres Munoz when also acquiring Will Vest and having the success of Brody Brecht in that stopper role this year, Anaheim, it's no surprise, obviously, that they're third in bullpen ERA and fourth in FIP. Like, they're able to convert their starters' efforts into leads and then into successes, and that's why they're almost 30 games over 500 right now.
Yeah, Anaheim really didn't have a ton to do at the deadline other than experiment. But again, there's not really any clear weaknesses to a team that's performing this well and having the statistical rankings that they do. So I can't really fault them for thinking that, let's just play around a little bit, but our core is nice.
They're only a couple games back of Texas in the division, but they are almost 80 back in run differential to Texas, who has come on this year and been a monster offensively. Where does Texas rank going into the second half of the season?
For me, Texas is the favorite right now, at least out of the AL, if not in all of baseball. Texas is complete top to bottom. They're the best run differential in the AL. They have the best offense in the AL. They have a top three pitching staff, and they really didn't have any movement at the deadline. But they did acquire Lyndon Harrington from the Red Sox earlier in the season. He is currently in their bullpen, but can perform as a swingman if needed. And they gave up a shortstop prospect of around the same value in Marquise Andrews. But again, neither of those are really like needle movers in terms of their overall performance. They've just been good. And this is one of the oldest, quote unquote, oldest dynasties in Top Shelf. This is one of only two teams to win two rings in the 5 years that we've had the file. And they look like they're well on their way to a third this year for me.
Texas is also making good use out of that stopper position with Yuri Perez. He's been in that role for like 3 years now, maybe 4 years, and he's been insane for them. It's such a joke that he's that good for that long. It's been frustrating being in that division. But one of the things that I thought was really noticeable about Texas this year is the prominence of their rookie sensation, Josh Springer at first base. He only spent a year in AAA. He basically made it right through the minors in a couple of years and then ended up in the majors this year to take over at first. And he already has 33 home runs, on pace for 45, tracking for almost 5 WAR in his first season in the bigs.
I mean, I think that's crazy that you can have Nick Kurtz on your roster and he's not the best first baseman that you have in the majors. He and Springer are basically taking DH in first base, and they are absolutely running over teams with their power. Like you said, 33 home runs already for Springer, 23 is no slouch for Kurtz, and those are not the only two threats in that lineup. I mean, top to bottom, it's a very, very good, almost murderer's row of names, and it's hard for me to picture a better playoff lineup right now in all of baseball.
I mean, top to bottom, they're pretty dang good. Like bringing over Cedon Rafaela this year, I don't know if he was supposed to be anything special, like outside of maybe a bench bat, just because his last couple years in Minnesota, he had one good year, he had one iffy year after he left Boston. But this year with Texas, he's putting up really, really strong offensive numbers. He's not the greatest center fielder still, but you'll take the hit on defense if it means that you can put more runs on the board, especially in a potent offense like Texas.
Yeah, I mean, Texas, by the way, is still fifth in zone rating in the major leagues. So even not having the greatest center fielder is made up by the fact that they have some pretty good corner outfielders. Sal Frelick, who they signed the offseason as one of the bigger acquisitions, has been perfectly good for them. Not quite as good as last year, but I mean, in a lineup that he's in, you can have a bit of a down year and not really be noticed. It's really hard to fault and look anywhere and see a clear weakness in this team. I mean, they're 14th in stolen bases, but when you're knocking everybody home with the long ball, it doesn't really matter which base you're on, right? So it'll be interesting to see how Texas continues going into the second half. We've seen teams rise and fall as the dog days of summer go on, but basically as we have it set, Texas is my bet.
Yeah, Texas has been super strong. I mean, that division in general has been strong for a few years now. We have two teams left in that division that are going in opposite directions. Houston's definitely on an upswing based on the back of their starting rotation and the last couple of drafts. Seattle's been on the downswing. Which one do you want to talk about first?
I'd like to talk about Houston first because I think Seattle is an interesting one to speak about because they're a complete 180 from their history in Top Shelf. But speaking on Houston first, they already knew that they weren't particularly going to be competitive in a division that's this strong this year. So they've been giving a lot of run to young players and they've been getting some pretty decent results. One of the most hyped prospects in Top Shelf history was starting pitcher Georgie Larson, ranked by OSA as number 3, but I think for many people he was the number 1 prospect in all of baseball. Had a bit of a shaky debut to the year, struggling with his control and getting hit around a little bit, but he's definitely settled in. He's already back to a league average ERA after a really, really tough start to the year. It's actually under 4 after the most recent sim as of this writing. So he's one that I've definitely been watching, and he particularly had a sparkling July with a 2.45 ERA and a 1.66 ERA plus.
Yeah, he's been on a roll lately. Georgie Larson's going to be the talk of the town for the next 10 years. He's basically only held back by his control. And if that ends up putting him in the bullpen, like, so be it. But the guy came into the league with 75 stamina, 80 whole runners as a lefty ground baller. My scout has him with 4 blue and 2 green, almost blue pitches. That's like, you're never going to find that guy again. He's a complete unicorn in the draft. If Houston can't capitalize on this, then, what are we even doing here? But I really like Carlos Marcano. He has turned out to be a fantastic get from Detroit once he came over to Houston a couple years ago, and he's just put up 3 really solid years. This is his best year by far. He's really dropped his home run rate down. He's only projected to give up 7 in 200 innings this year. So off the back of this, Houston's rotation is really formidable going into their rebuild.
Yeah, Marcano is a super, super promising piece for them. And, all across their roster, they do actually have a lot of players now that are showing with high ceilings. Obviously, some of them are different ways along their development path. Like Larson, for example, by our scouts is 63-80 with all of his pitches developed. I mean, it's almost impossible to understate how kind of disgusting it is to have a player come out of college that complete. But you have players like Luis Reeves, who's doing decent for them. You have Danny Roberts, who has a high ceiling, getting his first taste in the majors. Like all of these guys are pointing that Houston, if they can get this development pipeline to finish, should be, a contender. I think sooner rather than later. If not the division, definitely for the wild card.
Yeah, they still have a couple of young bats that are looking to unlock some power. Coleman Mizell in left field, he's DHing for them. You would hope that you get a little bit more than a 232, 289, 412 line, but he's only 25. He still has 10 points to go in that power. And most notably, their starting right fielder, Jose Lopez, who they signed as an international free agent a few years back, has 75 power, 75 potential power. He's only at 50 right now, and he's tracking for about 20 home runs this year. So if they can get him up toward that 25, 30, maybe even 35 range, then they'll start taking their great on base skills, which is getting them to the eighth on base percentage in the league right now, and they'll be able to translate it into higher than 13th in home runs. Hopefully that'll translate to being able to contribute to a strong division. Maybe they can finally compete with the big dogs. I mean, Houston's got a lot of room in their budget, and they've got a lot of great pieces. So I expect Houston to at least compete next year, if not, wait one more year just to get a little bit more development.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see whether or not they decide to lean all the way on their pipeline or if they move some of these guys for more established bats, even if they're more expensive. Houston's definitely a team to watch. Now, I want to segue into this segment for you because this is one that's, I think, near and dear to your heart. We're having a discussion on Seattle because Seattle, I really need to point out, okay? This is a team that averaged in the top shelf era from 2025 to 2030, which is the current season. This team has averaged 99 wins. Over the last 3 years, they've averaged 106 wins. For them to go from 100 and I believe it was four last year to essentially going into a full teardown, it's not something that anybody saw coming over the offseason. Can you tell us a little more?
Well, it wasn't pretty, and there were definitely some risky moves that didn't pan out, but there was something in the water in Seattle this year where even the established players were not doing anything of note going into the season. The whole team was 15th in almost every category throughout the end of March, early April, even end of April. It wasn't until mid June or even late June that we started winning games, which is crazy late in the year. Like we're still in a wild card spot, but there's no way for me to know at that point if we're going to be trending upward for more than 2 weeks. And unfortunately, that means that, if I'm a few million in the red, that it might just be the better idea at that time to start selling off pieces. Unfortunately for me, it wasn't a situation where I could just sell off a couple pieces and retain, you know, most of my draft capital or anything like that. My farm's depleted. So I really had to just go for broke at this point, and it's a huge disappointment for the fans, huge disappointment for the staff because I had to can a lot of them, and we really only have a few people left that are here to build it up. I'm sure the GM in Texas is happy about this, but people in Seattle not so thrilled, and I'm hoping that off the backs of Zach Neto, Cole Young, and Benny Montgomery, that we're able to build up a strong core again and compete in about 3 years.
Yeah, I mean, for anybody who's a fan of Seattle, I want to make sure that it's not cataclysmic in the sense that this is not a totally barren wasteland left after the sell-off. But, some big names are gone. I mean, you're really bearing the lead here by mentioning these others first, but I'm going to do it anyway. Corbin Burns, who was acquired in the offseason, top three rookie finisher Kiyuki Kageyama, starting pitcher Bryce Miller, Troy Taylor, ace reliever Ryan Harbin, and then, of course, the big guy, center fielder Julio Rodriguez, who has won an MVP for Seattle. I mean, all these guys are gone now.
Yeah, it was a lot. I know that it was painful. Julio kind of turned sour toward the end. He had a couple of really lousy injury-ridden seasons, and he developed poor traits, and unfortunately I didn't want to keep him around if he was just going to keep missing time, if I could get something back for him. So I ended up flipping him to Milwaukee and getting a couple of good prospects back, and we're just going to see where we go from here. It was supposed to be a really strong year for Seattle. We were supposed to compete again for a title. It didn't turn out that way, and now we're in, full teardown mode after a disappointing first half.
I do want to point out before we move on that the additions of second baseman Alexis Gaona and starting pitcher Sam Maselli, these are the number 66 and number 25 prospects in all of baseball. For a farm that was so depleted as yours going in, I think this is a pretty good return.
I hope so. I mean, I was able to get a few ranked prospects back in some of these deals and fill out my farm a little bit so that I'm no longer the 30th ranked system. I'm now up to 20. So, that's a pretty decent jump. I'm hoping that with another strong draft this coming year and in 2032, if I can get some pieces that are close to Major League ready, that I'll be able to fully, complete a rebuild and get back to competing like I'm used to. But it's going to be a challenge, and we'll see, with the other competitive teams in this division, how I end up shaping up against the old dogs in Anaheim and Texas, and now these new, young studs in Vegas and Houston. So now another thing to talk about at the deadline, since Seattle is risking their wild card spot, is the fact that Detroit decided to sell off a couple of their pieces, brought on one younger talent, but in that AL wildcard spot, Detroit and Seattle both being knocked out means that it's completely opened up for the rest of the teams.
I've gotten the sense that a lot of the teams that are, kind of hanging around the fringes are not feeling super confident about their chances to compete with the big dogs of the American League specifically. I know Texas, Anaheim, and Boston have been three of the best teams in baseball. And I think part of that dominance has kind of suppressed a little bit the desire to try it all in. Detroit still has been looking to find their way after their all in attempt basically kind of fell flat. They did send out Willie Abreu, who they picked up just a couple of seasons ago, who was unfortunately a bit of a disappointment for them, but he is having a bounce back year this year when he's going to Atlanta.
It was nice to see them pick up a younger piece in Byron Churio. Detroit needs something to build off of because their finances are really not looking good right now, and they're not getting the best performance out of their veterans. So, with a farm that will hopefully develop in a couple of years, and with getting rid of Riley Green and Willie Abreu to bring on one younger outfielder, Detroit should be able to compete. That division hasn't been the strongest in top shelf, but there is a team that looks like they could be a bright, shining, ray of hope right now in the Chicago White Sox, having made like 5 or 6 trades at the deadline and bringing on a lot of major acquisitions.
Yeah, the White Sox are a really interesting team because the GM has been extremely aggressive there. He's basically been freely using his draft capital to try and make the team as competitive as possible. They've been a bit of an underperformer this year, so I think they're actually much stronger than their record suggests. Their Pythagorean record actually had them 64 and 54 as of the current recording, which is a full 9 games of change over 55 and 63, which they are currently set at. I mean, they have upper half rankings in most of the relevant categories in the AL, like batting average, runs scored, even decent rankings in their pitching staff where they're looking for a little bit more consistency. But this is a team that probably shouldn't be as far under 500 as it is, and I would not be surprised after all of these major acquisitions for them to like rise significantly in, if not in the division, in the wild card.
I think that they're probably one of the prime candidates to get up there in the wild card standings right now. Because if we look at who's there currently, we have Toronto, who's likely to stay there because they have a fantastic record. And then Seattle and Detroit are falling out of the picture more than likely. Baltimore also sold at the deadline. Minnesota also sold at the deadline. So immediately the White Sox jump up to be in a prime position to take one of those spots. But with some of the White Sox acquisitions, we also saw that they're getting healthy seasons out of people like Aaron Judge and Royce Lewis, who, they'll contribute big stats, they'll contribute great to the clubhouse, they'll help you out a lot with power. It's a really incredibly rare and critical aspect of both of their games that you're able to get a full season out of them. And when you have young bats like Luke Adams and Cooper Pratt that are running the offense, you need those veteran power bats to drive them in. And hopefully the White Sox can be able to get closer to their Pythagorean record by way of their veteran bats as well.
Yeah, the offense is not actually something I'm too worried about with the White Sox. They're pretty good, and they've shown that they're pretty good at scoring runs. The thing that they're really going to be looking for in the second half of the season, that they did address with the additions of Santiago Suarez and Corbin Burns, is consistency in that pitching staff. They do have Sean Lennon, who has been extremely good for them. He's got one of the top ERAs in the American League. Not tracking for a ton of innings because he is getting his pitch count capped to protect him a little bit by the White Sox, but he is definitely translating dominance into helping the team win. And so the additions of Santiago Suarez and Corbin Burns, who are having pretty decent seasons themselves, should hopefully stabilize that a bit. I do need to point out, however, that unfortunately one of the better closers in top shelf, Yon Duran, has been unfortunately not just mediocre, but kind of bad this season for the Sox. Has had great preceding seasons for Minnesota and Boston, but had his K rate just absolutely crater this year from a consistent 10 per 9 all the way down to 5.6, and that is translating into him having a 5.34 ERA in the closer's role as an expensive closer. So that is definitely something that is hurting the White Sox late in games.
Minnesota is still retaining a little bit of that contract, but 25 mil a year for a negative WAR player, I think it doesn't take a genius to figure out that that's not a recipe for success, and it's probably contributing a lot to why Chicago is unable to take the leads that their starting pitching is giving them and convert them into wins, unfortunately. Now, for Minnesota, they made a couple of moves this season. They acquired some prospects and they got rid of Byron Churio. How are they looking once they were able to keep John Klein moving into next year and possibly the year after that?
Minnesota is going to be one of those teams where it's going to be up to the GM to build around the base that they have. They have actually pretty good pieces in their bullpen and their starting rotation. As you mentioned, John Klein, one of the best starters in the majors. He was retained to the trade deadline, and critically, I want to point out that he was never really advertised, even though some of the other pieces in the organization were. So that really signals to me that Minnesota is looking at him as the building block, and he's right in the middle of his prime and one of the highest rated, highest scouted pitchers in the entirety of not just the American League, but all of baseball. Closer David Hageman and relief pitcher Anderson Ramos are both having strong seasons as well, and they both have good potential with team control. So those are going to be players that they would look to build around when rebuilding stuff like the rotation and the bullpen. It'll be the offense that they're just going to have to figure out going forward. But they are in a historically kind of soft division. So I wouldn't be too surprised within a season or two, and depending on what kind of free agent class shows up, Minnesota could make some noise.
I'm looking at their division graph right now, and it's kind of ugly because, at least in mine, and I think in a couple other divisions, like I'm used to seeing a couple teams with straight up graphs, some teams in the middle, and some teams just purely tanking. The division graph right now for the AL Central is like a couple teams barely above zero, and the rest are negative. So, like you said, with a little bit weaker division, if Chicago can turn their acquisitions into a dynasty, that'd be great. But it's a long way off, and Minnesota's not that far behind them. Detroit's still going to be competitive. It's going to be interesting to see how that division shapes up. You were mentioning to me earlier how Cleveland is one of the unluckiest teams in the majors. Tell me why you think that they should be a little bit better than they're looking.
I gotta apologize to the GM of Cleveland because the Sims have not been treating him kindly in 2030. When I said to you that they are one of the unluckiest teams in the majors, I do mean that. Their Pythagorean record suggests that they should be first in the AL Central. I mean, it's a complete turnaround. They're a top five offensive squad. They're a top five run prevention squad. I mean, like, by all measurements and by just looking at the players on the surface, this is a team that should be good and should be competing with the big boys. At the same time, if you look just a little bit deeper under the surface, you're going to see things that are causing them to have this problem this year. They're currently fifth in the AL Central, and that's because they have a 2-8 record in extra innings and a 13-20 record in one-run games. I mean, it's just been spectacularly unclutch for them, and that's translating to a team that should be winning fairly dominantly into almost no wins at all.
Cleveland, I don't know how successful they would be if they made it into the playoffs this year, just because they have some really egregious splits. Like you were saying, there's the unclutch factor of extra inning and one run games, but they have a 541 win percentage against lefty starters versus a 407. They're 15 games below 500 versus right-handed starting pitchers. Like that's obviously not going to play. And their home road splits are crazy split too. They're 20 and 42 on the road compared to almost a 600 winning percentage at home. So if you're only winning games at home and you're only winning games against lefty starters and you're not clutch, even the strongest streaks, win streaks or hot streaks or, great performances from unlikely sources aren't going to save you in that long run.
It's unfortunate, but Cleveland is going to have to figure out a way to kind of address that going forward, whether or not it's a trend or if it's just something that's, again, just unlucky for this year. But if those are the kinds of things that they can address in the margins, they can definitely be a contender going forward. The foundation of this team is there. I want to make that clear. They have lots of players performing well. Their offense is really good. And they actually have a couple of starting pitchers that are young here in Tim Catucci and Rory Mejia. Both of those guys have high ceilings and are taking their first real full seasons. I mean, this is year 2 for both of them, but these are the first time they're really getting their full starting pitching load. Both of those guys are performing pretty promisingly, and those guys can be anchors in a rotation that can be filled out with veterans and that is actually pitching, reasonably well this year.
Cleveland is one of the two teams in the AL Central that didn't make any moves. Kansas City was the other one, and they're sitting in first place right now. But they've been consistently near the top or at the top of the division for the majority of the campaign, and they're still looking to be strong on the back of Bobby Witt Jr.
Kansas City is a team that has been in the basement of the AL Central during the life of the top shelf league. But for them specifically, they're actually having a bunch of breakout campaigns with finally giving some backup to Bobby Witt Jr., who's just been languishing on a roster that is just typically way below his talents. But this year, you're getting guys like right fielder Mason Neville, second baseman Johan Macias. They've actually promoted the number 74 prospect in baseball in third baseman Graham Seaberg. He's having a great year. First baseman Mike Zapata is doing pretty good in his limited time as well. Their biggest issue is that their bullpen, not super reliable, and overall, like the entire body of work of the rotation, not great either. Can they keep it up? Hard to say. I mean, they're really a lopsided team. They're 4th in runs scored and 13th in runs against. So if they can continue to slug their way into wins, that'd be great. But with how wide open the AL Central is, it's hard for me to say that the Royals are going to continue to be at the top, but they should still be in that mix.
Yeah, I was a little confused at the deadline that they didn't try to upgrade that bullpen, especially. They have a little bit of financial freedom that they can work with, but Manuel Castro having 32 saves despite a 4.66 ERA, I mean, it's impressive in its own right, but you have to think that there's a better option out there, even internally. Fortunately for KC, their offense is among the top 3 or 4 in every major category, especially being able to be top 2 in batting average and OBP, which is huge when you're in a division that, like you said earlier, is a little bit weaker. You need to have these on base skills so that you can steal bases and, play a little bit of small ball to get past these weaker teams. Like you said, Macias has been fantastic. In 73 games, he's batting 306, which leads the team for players that qualify. And fortunately for KC, there isn't a huge hole in their team from top to bottom. The fact that each member is able to contribute in one way or another makes their team a little bit more complete compared to some of the other teams in the AL Central. I think their toughest competition is going to be that resurging Chicago White Sox team because they actually made some moves at the deadline. And KC is missing a little bit of their power in Tom Diana on the IL. So if they can keep it up, then I'm sure KC will be able to make it at least into a wild card spot, if not maintain that division lead. But we'll have to see if they can keep up their consistency. Like you said, the pitching hasn't been amazing, and you do need strong pitching once you get into the postseason. If we move over to the NL Central, 3 of those teams didn't make any moves either, but Chicago and Milwaukee ended up making plays to strengthen their teams at the deadline. They're only 2 games apart at the top of the division, but it's really like a 4-team race with those two, St. Louis and Cincinnati.
Yeah, I think it's big that the NL Central is this close. We really thought going into the season that Milwaukee was probably going to run away with it. And while they have been the best team in the Central all year, they really aren't running away with the division. They had a big lead early on, but now they're not too far up, and both the Cubs and Cardinals are knocking right at the door.
Cardinals are on a hot streak right now, 8-2 in their last 10 coming into this recording on a 7-win streak. Actually puts them above the Cubs, and now they're only 2.5 back of those Brewers. But the Brewers did make one of the biggest splashes at the deadline. They got Julio Rodriguez from Seattle. Now, he's still going to be out for a few weeks, and then since he's been out for the entire year, it's probably going to take a lengthy rehab assignment to get him back on track, but he's going to be there for the playoffs. Does he fit right in? Does he help with the offense? Does he make the difference? Because the Cubs also pick someone up, and St. Louis has their strongest acquisition of the offseason in David Gray, who's been absolutely mashing.
Yeah, Milwaukee has had one of the weirder seasons. They're a very, very good team in the NL in terms of run prevention, retained that strength from last year. But the thing that's regressed a little bit with them, and, maybe due to some trades in the offseason, is that their runs scored is actually one of the bottom ones in the NL. Now, they're not cratered. They're currently tied for ninth as of this recording. But for a playoff team and for a team that was in the World Series last year, that's not generally what you're looking for. So the addition of Julio Rodriguez should be really big as another huge bat to help because they do have some good pieces, but they're just not scoring that many runs.
Was actually noticing a couple days ago when I was looking at the Brewers major league roster that Max Muncy has taken a huge step back this year. I say huge, it is pretty significant. Going into the season, he was at 74-74 for me, and now he's down to 69-69, where his defensive rating has actually, gone back. His defensive rating at shortstop for me has dropped a little bit. Last year, he put up a 115 OPS plus on way to 5 WAR, and he was a huge contributor in that almost title run by Milwaukee. This year, he's tracking a little bit below league average, and it definitely hurts the run production. He's starting to not crater, but if you go right from Muncie down to the end of their lineup, their starting nine, no one's hitting above 250, and that's a far cry from where the top of their lineup's hitting around like 290 ish.
Yeah, they're going to hope that Julio Rodriguez can help kind of stabilize that because, as you said, Muncy was a positive offensive contributor last year. Now he's pretty generously neutral. His defensive metrics, at least, are still okay. So I don't see too much of a regression there. And he's definitely helping with the run prevention. But yeah, I mean, like you got a guy that's making $37 million a year this year, is signed through 2037. You're kind of hoping that he's more than just a defensive specialist.
Now, the Cubs, speaking of defensive specialists, have tried to, make the most of having Adrian Santana on that roster, really putting up a lot of runs prevented from the shortstop position. But the Cubs are also getting huge offensive contributions this year from Kazunori Kawasaki, their big international free agent acquisition, and first base Christian Moore, came over from Anaheim. How are the Cubs looking now that they're trying to return to the postseason for the first time in 3 years?
Yeah, the Cubs are basically trying to get through that upswing of the rebuilding period, and they're looking pretty good. Kazunori Kawasaki really is, like you said, a highlight for that team. Hitting just at 200, but he's got one of the top OPSs in all of the National League at 844 off the back of a 362 on base percentage and a 483 slugging. He's currently hit 31 home runs. He's been a monster for Chicago, and he's been every bit as good as they were hoping he would be when they signed him. Now, it's really hard to mention him without also mentioning, like you said, David Garay with the Cardinals, because not only were they international free agents in the same class, they basically are rated as the same type of hitter. They both are scouted at 80 power, 80 eye, with a good BABIP, and will strike out a ton.
Yeah, unfortunately, neither one can field. For Gray, he's DHing in St. Louis. For Kawasaki, the GM is at least trying him out in the outfield because that's where his ratings seem to suggest he could be the best for the time being. They're still not, contributing in a positive way when you're putting up a combined -9 zone rating across two outfield positions in 600 or 700 innings. That's not fantastic. And it also kind of speaks to how important of an offensive contribution Kawasaki has had in Chicago because, in spite of all of that, he's still going to put up 3.5 WAR, which is crazy for someone who has that defensive profile.
And I want to point out that I think that Chicago have done something really smart, and that yes, we are having Kawasaki play in these corners, and he's not doing particularly well, but they've managed to make sure that they roster a very solid center fielder in Dawson Brown. Now, he was an all star this year. He's hitting pretty well. I wouldn't say he's overly special in the hitting department, but he's putting up great numbers in center field. A 12.9 zone rating is contributing to the fact that even with that combined -9, like you mentioned, Chicago is actually the third best team in the NL in zone rating. So that means that they've assembled a defensively sound squad and one that's mitigating the impact of someone that's even as bad in the field as Kawasaki.
Yeah, they're rounding out the squad with a lot of, great defenders. Jefferson Rojas, one of their top prospects for years, has come up and played a fantastic second base, and he has two All-Star nods under his name now. You have Adrian Santana, mentioned earlier, to play short, Dawson Brown in center field, and Russell Shepard has come up in his rookie year, and they've moved him over to third base, where he is putting up some great numbers as well. Now, off the back of that, Chicago's rotation is one of the more consistent in the league, fortunately. They're third in the National League in starters ERA, and a lot of that is off the back of their rookie sensation, Seth Thibodeau.
Thibodeau has been great for them this season. He's currently rocking a 10-9 record. Has a high ceiling, mostly developed so far, but putting up 145 innings of 110 ERA plus ball with tracking for 200 innings in his first full year in the majors. That's a great asset to have, not only for just a young team, but for any team that's looking to be a postseason contender.
Now, at the bottom of the division, we unfortunately have the Pirates, who, after making a run for it a couple of years ago, haven't been able to make it back there. They didn't make anything happen at the deadline this year, and the ask is still really high on Skeens, as far as I can tell. But they do have the number one farm system in the league. So where are they looking? Are they looking at a short rebuild? Are they looking at a few years down the line? Where are we at with Pittsburgh?
I think Pittsburgh is a hard team to evaluate. The biggest thing is that they've been a bit of an isolated squad in the history of Top Shelf. They haven't made a ton of trades. They have made a couple, like Orion Kerkering was traded to them, who is their current closer. He was traded in 2026, all the way back then. But the GM's insistence on holding on to Paul Skeens has signaled to me that he believes that they can build a team around that guy. And Skeens is still one of the preeminent pitchers in the majors. He won the 2029 NL Cy Young Award, and in the last two seasons, pitched 230 innings each. I mean, he's been an absolute workhorse, and regardless of what's been going on around the Pirates, he's been worth every penny of his contract. With the number one farm system, that does signal to me that they think that they can get those players up in the pipeline before Skeens ages out of being that elite guy. And to be clear, they do have plenty of players that are promising and pushing towards that type of impact in the majors soon. Like Trevor Hansen, for one, is just waiting in AAA. He's 47-64 by Red Sox scouts, but he's looking very much close to the major leagues already. And they're just guys all around, including Alexis Ochoa, Howell Whelan, who we talked about in our preseason prediction. I mean, these guys, if they reach the majors, are going to be cheap, they're going to be good, and if they reach their potential, just like some of the other guys have in Chicago and St. Louis, I could see a similar type of rise.
Yeah, I mean, Pittsburgh is facing one major issue, and that's the way that they've gone about their finances over the last couple of years. They really went all in on O'Neal Cruz and Jared Jones with long extensions. O'Neal Cruz this year is hitting 183. Jared Jones has been hurt for a lot of the last few years, and this year, even in the rotation, he's down to 42-42 as his ratings. You're paying him for another 4 years, including a player option. You're paying O'Neal Cruz for another two, and Brian Reynolds is surprisingly putting up decent numbers, even though he has, one of the uglier contract numbers that Pittsburgh can deal with. Like you said, though, if you can get the prospects up at a relatively cheap price and maybe extend one or two of them, like right off the bat, you see Connor Griffin coming into this year, going into his third year in the majors, and he's going to put up almost 5 WAR. He's got positional versatility up the wazoo. He has power. He has speed. You're going to want to extend him and probably build off of him, whether or not that's with Skeens or without Skeens, who's already hitting age 28 this year. Remains to be seen. But Pittsburgh definitely has to overcome some financial burden before they can really make a successful run at, winning the division or possibly just pursuing a wild card spot.
With smart spending and with a little luck in the development pipeline, Pittsburgh could be back up. But at the moment, they're definitely stuck in their rebuild.
Yeah, and then, we still have Cincy here. They're performing a lot better than we thought they would. Unfortunately, Cuvée, off of his massive performance last year during his rookie season, has been hurt for a good chunk of this year, and he's taking a little bit longer to get back than people would like, obviously. Cincy could be competitive if they just put some things together, because they're getting big contributions out of young guys. You've got Hector Rodriguez, you've got Cam Collier, you've got Leo Balcazar, you still have some good contributions out of the young guys, and you have some good prospects coming up. So, fortunately for Cincy, they'll be able to put it together, but it's really a mystery whether or not they'll be able to put it together sooner rather than later.
Yeah, since he has one of the more interesting roster constructions in the league, I believe they roster the fewest amount of pitchers in the entire league, just 10. To be honest with you, they've done pretty well so far. Now, I think their record, unfortunately, is a little bit of a mirage. They are expected by Pythagorean record to be a little bit weaker than they are. Not too much, but about 4 games at the time of this recording. And with a team that isn't necessarily top in runs scored and definitely isn't top in runs against, being only 3 games under 500, honestly, a little bit of a blessing. It feels like this team should be a little bit further down. Now, that doesn't mean that this team is barren. They have, like you said, a bunch of young talent, chiefly Cuvée among them, but they definitely have some work to do before they're real contenders in a division that has multiple teams looking to secure wildcard spots.
Now, since he still has a negative run differential this year, similarly to another team that didn't make any moves at the deadline, or I guess made one move at the deadline, Arizona. Their GM has been very vocal about wanting to move away from some pieces, especially the aging veterans, and he was able to do it with Felix Bautista, sending him off to Miami in exchange for Connolly early, but Arizona's still in a healthy deficit, compared to the top three teams in the NL West. I was really surprised that the Dodgers stayed put at the deadline. They have some financial freedom there, and they're not that far back from San Diego. Do you think they could have made any moves?
I think the Dodgers definitely had some room to make moves, but honestly, they're one of my dark horses in the NL, really. They're still actually the top run scoring offense in all of the National League. Even the departure of Shohei Ohtani, who, many think had a MVP caliber offensive season last year, hasn't really slowed them down. They're getting contributions up and down their lineup from all types of players, which is leading to great run production. Now, their runs against hasn't been quite as good. It's actually trending towards the opposite end of the spectrum. They are currently, as of this recording, 12th in runs against, which is usually not going to get it done. But they do have two good starting pitchers at the top of their rotation in their Japanese duo of Roki Sasaki and Yoshinobu Yamamoto.
Yeah, my scouts have Sasaki at 75, 79, and even though Yamamoto's down in the mid 50s for me, they're still rocking, one of the top 1-2s in all of baseball. And when you pair that with a couple of great top of the order bats in Dylan Beavers and Marcelo Meyer, you still are going to have a very competitive team. The Dodgers, as of this recording, are only 7 games back. They're third in the NL West, but they are occupying the third wildcard spot right now, meaning that maybe if they had made a move, they could push themselves above San Francisco or San Diego, at least in the wild card spot. As of right now, they're going to be vying for that third spot with teams like the Cardinals, the Mets, the Cubs, possibly the Braves and the Rockies. The Rockies actually, now that we touch on them, been a very surprising story this year. They're only 3 games under 500.
Yeah, the Rockies have been trending upwards, and I know it's a bit of a joke. I love to talk about Rocktober coming, but truly, the Rockies have not been as bad a team as everybody is kind of used to them being. They do have Charlie Condon, who, I mean, he's hit 45 home runs at the trade deadline and is tracking for 62. I mean, he's putting on one of the true power performances in recent history. The Rockies still need to figure out a couple of things, though. Their runs against is not great at 10th in the NL, and their actual runs scored, even with big power bats like Fernandez, Condon, Curly, even Alcantara's providing some pop at the bottom of the lineup. They're still only the 11th run scoring offense in the NL, so they'll need to have a little more consistency and probably getting on base and such. But there's definitely a foundation here, and that's something that probably couldn't have been said about previous Rockies teams and the roster that they put on the field.
They are benefiting a little bit from a hot start to the season. In May, they were above 500. June and July, they were significantly lower, and that's unfortunately contributed to them falling below 500. The Rockies do seem to have this weird pattern, though, of having random, breakout seasons from young stars. This year, it's Jackson Baker, one of the Rockies' really low draft picks from a few years back. He's turned out to put out 11-7 record with a 3.18 ERA. Wyatt Halverson, who was last year's superstar, has put up a 5.6 ERA this year. So they're replacing one with the other, but it's at least contributing to a bright spot in that rotation.
I also want to mention, and I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention Colorado just recently promoted the number 6 prospect in baseball in Victor Cavazos, and he is currently having a blistering start to his career. It's only 30
Yeah,
games, but currently hitting 322, 354, 458.
Yeah, he's been playing a really good shortstop since he came up. He's at 46.75 by my scouts right now, but he was actually the guy I wanted to take back then in the draft in 2029. Unfortunately, obviously, I was picking 30th and he went second overall, so that was never going to happen. But as he went through the minors, he wasn't a tremendous offensive threat, and so I'm sure the GM of the Rockies wasn't sure how to receive Cavazos when he made it up to the majors. Fortunately, he's done very well for himself. He's already put up 1.4 WAR, and he should be on the major league roster for the rest of the year. I just noticed that Charlie Condon is going into his first year of ARB this year. So if Charlie Condon, sticks around for another couple years at this production level, and you have Cavazos on a minimum deal, Colorado could end up buying a couple, free agents, possibly making him moves at the deadline, and being a huge contender in the next year or two.
I think that the offensive promise in Colorado is really, really helpful. Again, their park obviously is one of the most notorious offensive parks in all of baseball and really in baseball history. So the fact that they're getting an offensive core that could play to those strengths, I think that's a really good sign for them.
Now, Arizona is only a few games out of Wild Card 3, and they do have a really good offensive core right now. They have AJ Gracia, they have Corbin Carroll, Brooks Lee is back for another good year, and now with Connolly early, it does signal that Arizona could be on the rise, but probably not until next year because of their pitching needs.
Yeah, Arizona's really not out of the postseason picture. They're only 4.5 or 5.5, excuse me, back of the wild card, which is it's significant, but it's not insurmountable. Their problem really is this year that they haven't had any consistency in pitching. They're currently 15th in the NL in runs prevented, and it's been a big problem because they haven't really gotten anything going with the rotating cast in the rotation. And I think this was mentioned in our preseason preview as well. Justin Martinez was hurt for a big majority of the year, and since returning, he's unfortunately not been effective. Now, I don't think that's been reflected in his ratings falling so much, but he's definitely not been the back end anchor that Arizona has expected of him over the last couple of years.
He's been elite for a long time, and there's no reason to think that he won't continue to be that. It's not like he's fragile. He's still at a very affordable price. He's still a ground ball pitcher. As long as he gets it together, then Arizona should be able to contribute to competing in that division and being able to convert those leads. But they've really suffered from the long term injury to Jacob Steinmetz earlier in the year. The rotation hasn't been able to pick it up. They're throwing out there some replacement pieces that don't have really high stamina, don't have great control. You're really just hoping that the offense can put it together, but unfortunately the Arizona offense has nothing in the way of power, and that makes it difficult to overpower teams when you don't have that pitching support.
Yeah, I mean, just they're 14th in home runs. They're very top heavy. They're top, out of the top five hitters, four of them are really a home run threat, and then almost nobody else on the roster is. So it's pretty easy for a team to game plan and pitch around those guys if they want to limit the damage. Arizona definitely could, if they suddenly find another gear in the pitching staff, make some noise in that NL wildcard race. But I think the departure of Bautista definitely signals that the rest of this year is probably a bit of a retool before they try again to push for that division and or wildcard spot that we're used to seeing them in.
Yeah, Arizona currently in last place, even though they aren't completely out of it. They're only 5.5 back at that wild card. But one of the teams that is pushing for either the division title or the wild card spot is the San Francisco Giants. They are currently tied with the Padres for first in the NL West, and they surprisingly didn't make too many moves at the deadline. They do have a little bit of financial burden. They're in the red currently, but they're getting another fantastic year out of their first baseman Moriguchi, who's just been a sensation sort of under the radar since he came over from Japan.
Yeah, I think Moriguchi has been suppressed by the fact that he's played on a team that hasn't really been very good over the last couple of years. But I'll be the first one to say I got to eat crow on this one too. I did not believe in OSA ranking the Giants at the top of the NL West simply due to the performances that they've been putting together last year and over the last couple of years. But they've definitely proven me wrong. All of their metrics look really, really good. They're top five in runs scored. They're top three in runs against in the NL. I want to highlight specifically a couple of things. Bryce Eldridge and Moriguchi, who you just mentioned, both of those guys are tracking for 41 home runs in Oracle Park as lefties. I mean, that is a feat in and of itself. That's one of the toughest parks of the majors to hit home runs, and those guys are putting together elite power seasons back to back. In addition, one of the players that I really, really love and have been watching is starting pitcher Ty Horn. He's absolutely blossomed into their ace, putting up currently 24 starts at a 3.03 ERA, 130 ERA plus. He started the All-Star game for the NL. I mean, right now, he's developed into the complete package, and he's just 25 years old in his second year in the majors.
Ty Horn is he's turned into a fantastic control pitcher. He was drafted in the 15th round back in 2026. If we look right here, according to my scout, at that time he was rated at 24.38. That's nothing, in all regard to turning into some kind of ace. And he's just turned it on the last couple of years. Last year he had a pretty successful rookie year, coming out of the bullpen for a few games and starting the majority. But this year he's a full-time starter. He's tracking for about 190 innings and 6.6 WAR, like you said, starting the All-Star game for the National League, and he's definitely driving this bus going into the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, the real question will be, since San Francisco is not the proven team in this division so far, whether or not they can hold off the Padres. But it wouldn't surprise me if they do. They have elite metrics all over, they have good pieces everywhere. I mean, this is a team that I'd be excited to watch.
And finally, here in the NL West, we have San Diego, who has come from a full rebuild at the beginning of the top shelf franchise and made it to where they're a perennial contender now. They didn't make it all the way last year in the playoffs, but this year they're looking really strong.
San Diego won 102 games, and they're looking to pick up right where they left off. They're the number three run scoring offense in the NL, the number five run prevention team in the NL. Most of the pieces that they've been able to bring back have been doing very well. At this point, it's easy to say that Daniel Carrata is a San Diego legend. As an international free agent, he's put up a number of very good seasons for them. And despite having a slightly below average season last year where he started 37 games, he's on track this year to put up his best season yet. 169 ERA plus, a 2.37 ERA, tracking for 30 starts, tracking for 180 innings. This is ace level production from a guy that's been very, very good for San Diego the entire time he's been there.
Yeah, he's been excellent, and the San Diego bullpen backs that up 100%. Luke Little was a fantastic acquisition from Chicago a few years back, and San Diego ended up signing him to another extension this year after the last one, which has been fantastic because you're getting an elite closer at, let's see, 8.6 mil, which is unbelievable value. You put a couple of great bats together by acquiring Jason Dominguez, having a MVP in Pedro Ramirez, and then getting another very solid, if not elite season from Kyle Manzardo, and San Diego's right there on the cusp. They were able to pull together a couple of trades at the deadline, pulling Jason Dominguez from the Yanks and then grabbing Diego Barrera from the Athletics. And the reason that Barrera is important is because there was no lefty in the rotation doing anything of note before that. And so when you bring in, I know this very well, when you bring in that other hand, it changes the dynamic of the short playoff series. So early on, if you come in as a wild card team or if you come in as a lower seeded division winner, you need to win, 3-game and 5-game series just to move to the place where you think you will be able to contribute and compete at the highest level. And Barrera is hopefully going to be able to do that for them. Unfortunately, this past sim, Gabriel Arias is going to be out for the year. He broke a bone in his elbow. He was a huge acquisition in a couple of off seasons ago for San Diego, and he's been great on defense. He's had some decent offense. This year was his strongest offensive campaign to date, so it's unfortunate that he's going to be knocked out for the rest of the season. But off the back of that strong top of the lineup and a strong rotation, hopefully San Diego can bounce back from that and stay consistent through the end.
Yeah, I mean, even without him, they have six players above 13 home runs at the trade deadline mark. So it's hard to ever replace a player that's, complete like that. But if there's any lineup in baseball that can absorb it, this is one of the few.
The other team that I was really surprised about not making any moves at the deadline is Toronto, who's currently second in the AL East off of some really strong pitching this year. Unfortunately, though, they just had a long term injury to their closer. And so they're going to be replacing him. And since they didn't pick anyone up at the deadline, they're going to probably be working off the back of superstar Dylan O'Ray again.
Yeah, the Toronto Blue Jays have been a little bit of an enigma this year. They've taken a bit of a step back. They're currently sitting just a game under 500, but still second place in a, honestly relatively soft AL East. They are a better team here than what this suggests, though. They are top five team in runs against. They're number four, and their runs scored are looking a little bit worse than last year. I mean, they're eighth in the AL right now, but there's definitely pieces in this lineup that can have the upside. I mean, unfortunately, stalwart franchise player Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is just having, he's having an okay offensive season, but it's just not what you expect from a guy with his pedigree. I mean, he currently in 55 games has 2 home runs. Like that's just not going to cut it for a player of that caliber in an offense that needs his help.
Yeah, and it's tough to commit $36 million a year for the next, let's see, the next 10 years when you're not putting up that much offensive contribution. Fortunately for Toronto, they have a strong rotation. Trey Savage has had a great campaign. Ricky Tiedemann's actually had a solid step up this year from last year. The only thing that he might want to, work on is that control. Walking a lot of people, not going to do well come October. But with Carlos Contreras having made a sizable contribution last year and just going right back at it this year, he's going to be surpassing his inning total by a hefty amount, tracking for 230 innings this year, which is fantastic, especially for a young player. Being able to contribute that much is going to help Toronto get past a couple of those wildcard teams and make it into the postseason. Unfortunately for Toronto, the big whale in the way is those Boston Red Sox, who have also won a couple of titles.
I mean, Boston is doing well in the context of the AL East. They are one of the top teams in the American League. But as the GM of Boston, in my opinion, it's a slight mirage. I would personally place us in more of a second tier rather than in the same tier as maybe the Angels or the Rangers. The offense hasn't actually been all that impressive this year. I think the main culprit of that is the fact that Roman Anthony was hurt earlier in the year. And now a couple of guys that were really good for us in the World Series run are unfortunately having some fairly big regression years. Eduardo Quintero, who was having a good season in center field last year, unfortunately down to hitting 239. Rochalowski, who has been kind of a breakout rookie star for us at third base, he's having a putrid year and with the bat. I mean, we're talking like 40% under league average type, hitting 219 as of this recording. So guys that you expect to be good, like Caminero and Collie, doing okay. So that's personally why we traded for Jordan Alvarez to try and shore up that DH position and get a little bit more offensive consistency into the lineup.
Yeah, you guys were the only buyer this season at the deadline, picking up both power bats, Jordan Alvarez from Anaheim and Kyuki Kageyama from Seattle. Now, Jordan's actually had a good season. His concern is always injury. Kageyama has had an awful year in Seattle, unfortunately, not following up on last year's top three rookie of the year campaign whatsoever. But since you were the only buyer, where are these players fitting into your plans for the rest of the season?
Jordan's going to take most of the reps at DH. I'm going to try and protect that, like you said, injury risk by having him not play the field. And if he can get us to the playoffs healthy, then I think that he'll be a pretty big weapon there. Kageyama is more of a bench bat for me. There was a bit of money attached to him that I had retained in our deal, but with him, there's a lot of upside, as you mentioned. I mean, like we saw last year, he had the potential to be tracking for like a 40-40 season. So I'm hoping that he manifests some of that if I protect him with some good, proper platoon hitting. It's really mostly the bullpen. I mean, we have an absolute star in Kikuo Fujioka carrying us at the top of the rotation, but many of my main pieces in the World Series run last year have taken a fair step back this year.
Yeah, I did notice that most of the starters, especially. However, Tony Pluta is a complete stud in that closer role. You have him, your multiple setup men, and some good specialists, and your bullpen is unstoppable. You are going to need a little bit more offensive contribution since you're 11th in home runs in the AL, and you only have two players that are currently hitting 20 or more, which isn't great when you consider that Boston is trying to go for their third title. But realistically, you still are tops in a division where two teams sold and two teams didn't make a move. So you should be tracking toward, a pretty successful run, especially getting that first round bye potentially if you can slot in right behind Texas. Now, the Baltimore Orioles are an interesting team because they're only 8 games back of 500, 8 games under, but they ended up selling Christian Campbell because I think they're looking a little bit more toward the future.
Baltimore actually was competing with Toronto for that second spot much earlier in the season, but they've had some pretty heavy underperformances. Guys like Mackenzie Gore, who have been traditionally pretty good pitchers, is having a pretty awful season. And, there's just been underperformance all across the roster, including a pretty weak starting rotation overall. So I think Baltimore kind of saw the writing on the wall and said, like, look, let's retool. It's not been that long since we last won a World Series. So he made some light moves. I'm interested to see what will happen going forward in the offseason.
One of the big moves that Baltimore is going to have to make a decision on is what they do with Samuel Basallo. He is going to cost about 22 million in arb this year because it's his last year of arbitration, and he's still producing at an exceptional level, especially at his premier position, being able to both field and hit. You're never going to get that with a 25-year-old catcher. If they need to lock him down to be their franchise cornerstone for the future, they should be able to because Tanner Bybee's contract's coming off the books. Sanchez probably only has one more year. They also have Kenzie Gore with a player option. He could choose to decline that as well. And then most of their money is just caught up in arbitration deals with players that they're probably not going to carry out through the duration of their arbitration, which should free up Baltimore to maybe make a splash if there's some young international free agent.
There are some building blocks here, but they're going to have to look for a rebound for some of these players that are still going to be sticking around as well.
Yeah. Now, Baltimore is one of the teams that sold. The other team is the Yankees, who are with a new GM now. They've hired some staff finally, jokes, and they are working with not the greatest financial situation, except for the fact that they have the most room in the entire league. So they're looking at making a huge move probably in the offseason. They still have a huge market size, and they have needs across the board everywhere.
Yeah, the Yankees are a super interesting team. They've not been particularly good in the life of Top Shelf, but with new leadership and new management, I think you're underselling a little bit. The Yankees next year, without accounting for arbitration contracts, will be looking at $194 million in budget room. I mean, there's almost no way that that's not the most in the league, which means that if they so choose, they definitely can go ahead and buy their way back into a competitive team. Now, with the Yankees specifically, there are some holes that they're going to have to fill.
Yeah, and they are unfortunately not going to be super fortunate with having prospects come up in the next year or so. They've got a couple years before they have anyone of note coming up to contribute to the major league squad. But free agency is, of course, another way to supplement your roster. And when you have that sort of money, you might be able to take on superstars on losing teams. Like maybe a star pitcher is on a team that decides it's time to rebuild. Yankees could jump in and pounce on that, and all of a sudden they're, one or two players away from actually making a competitive run. Now, unfortunately, trading away Jason Dominguez, that was probably your best bet for a long-term extension. They're getting some contribution this year from other pieces. Sean Noel has actually had a bounce back with the Yankees. Evan Carter's been pretty decent after he came over from Texas, but neither one of those players are probably going to be extended long-term. Unfortunately for the Yankees, Jason Dominguez was probably your ticket at making a really strong core. So it's going to be from the ground up probably as the new GM comes in. The last team here to talk about is the Tampa Bay Rays. They have, farm talent like crazy. The number one prospect, Nick Corbin, has come up and produced mixed results, but the GM, I know, is still confident that he'll be able to pull it together. The rest of the rotation's actually been doing pretty well off the back of Chase Burns, who is a total cheat code. He's possibly the best player in the entire league.
Yeah, Chase Burns. I mean, it can't be overstated how good he's been. Not to toot my own horn, but Kiko Fujioka has been probably the best pitcher in the AL over the last, honestly, over the life of Top Shelf. If you look at the consistent body of work, but In a full season right now, Chase Burns is putting up numbers that are just as good, if not better. He did have a bit of a hiccup with a few weeks of injury in the middle of the season, which has cut down his rate stats, but he's still easily one of the best strikeout pitchers, if not the best strikeout pitchers as a starter in the league. He's putting up innings, he's preventing runs. I mean, he's the complete package.
Yeah, unfortunately, Tampa was able to sign him to a fairly cheap extension. 7 years, $150 million for a player at Chase Burns' caliber. Like, I have him at 73, 78 as a ground ball pitcher with 65 stamina. That's an excellent value for a player of that caliber. And with Tampa's promising talent coming up right now, there's a chance that even at 50 and 69, they could be trending upward. I would say they're probably still 2 years out just because they need some more offensive contribution, but at least they have Xavier Isaac right now.
Yeah, Xavier Isaac is absolutely mashing right now in the major leagues for them. Again, none of this is really contributing or translating rather to wins in the current year, but there's the foundation is there. They have pieces that are young and currently performing, and then in addition to that, there are tons of reinforcements on the way. I mean, Tampa is one of the top three systems in all of baseball, and their players are starting to peak at the same time. I really like the work that their GM has done to try and kind of align these timelines. And, with a clever trade or two, maybe even a sneaky free agent signing, would not be at all surprised to see this team making noise at a wild card hunt very soon. We hope you enjoyed our coverage of the 2030 deadline, and we'll be eyeing that playoff picture as we close out the rest of the season. From Jacob Red Sox
And Aaron Mariners.
This has been episode 2 of Spreadsheets and Sliders. See you next time.